Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast. I'm J.W. Stewart, a veteran broadcaster and journalist with nearly 30 years experience. I've worked at ESPN and NBC, and now I teach at the University of New Haven.
And I'm Shane Zenger. I started my career as a football coach at Drake, Kansas State, South Florida, and Wyoming before becoming the director of athletics at Illinois State University, the University of Kansas, and now the University of New Haven. And this is the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast.
Hi, and welcome once again to the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast brought to you by the Pink Clover Foundation. Thank you for joining us across all of our social media platforms. You can watch our podcast on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. And of course, you can always listen to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. I'm J.W. Stewart, joined as always by Dr. Z, Shane Zenger, and our special guest today is Miles McPherson. Miles is the greatest football player in the history of the University of New Haven. He's in our Hall of Fame. He holds the career interceptions record still at UNH. He was a All-America back in our last year of Division III back in the early 80s, back in 1981. Went on to play in the NFL and now is the founder and pastor of the Rock Church in San Diego. As we continue our conversation about race relations in America, and Miles has had a very strong voice in that. Miles, welcome to the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast. We're glad you're here.
My pleasure. You make me feel old when you say all that back in 81. They didn't have podcasts in 81.
No, we didn't. I won't tell you how old I was in 81 either.
Black and white TV.
That's right. So before we kind of get into it, get into the deep end. Dr. Z, you and Miles know each other a little bit, don't you?
You know, it's been one of my most fun experiences here in my 9 months at UNH. And the relationship began, for those of you from this area, at Pepe's, where I think I caused Miles to go off his healthy diet. And exactly. we delved in. And since then, it's just been he's been a great friend to me and advisor and mentor in many ways. And can't thank him enough for that.
Miles, give us an idea of how you got to where you are. How did you get to the University of New Haven? What were your days like at UNH when you played football for us, and then on to the NFL, and finally how you ended up finding religion, or how religion found you and founding the Rock Church?
Wow. That's a long story. So I played football at a high school, Malvern High School in New York, and we had a very small budget. Actually, they canceled football after my second game. And then someone donated some money, but we had no film. Matter of fact, the only film of the game I had, my dad took on his own camera. And so I wasn't recruited by a lot of people. My dad gave that film to my Pop Warner football coach, who brought it to the University of New Haven, and they recruited me. There was no scholarship, so I just walked on like everybody else. Was Division III, played 4 years, met my wife there. We're still married. 36 years, met her. She hates my haircut. She just told me 5 minutes ago, you look horrible, grow your hair back, literally 5 minutes ago. And then 4 years at UNH, it was absolutely amazing. Without getting into all the records, I had a great time. We had a great football family there, got drafted to the NFL. Coach Rio, my DB coach, sent a flyer to every NFL team after my junior year, after I was All-American. And nobody came to watch me play. And then a few teams came after the season and watched film, and I was drafted to the Los Angeles Rams. From that, got cut, went play for the Chargers for 4 years. My first 2 years, I was doing cocaine, chasing women, running, smoking weed, and I asked Christ to be my savior after my second year, after doing cocaine all night, April 12, 1984. Stopped doing cocaine that day. It's okay, Lord, I'm gonna tell people about how good you've been to me. And I've been doing that ever since 1984 and started the church in 2000. And we're rolling. That's a lot.
That's a lot. That is a lot. So you were able to quit drugs without going to a program?
One day.
Wow.
One day, April 12, 1984, I just said, Lord, Jesus, I'm going to give my life to you. I'll do whatever you want. I'm still trying to fulfill that. And I never did cocaine again, never smoked weed again. And got back with my girlfriend that day, and we've been together ever since that day. So I gave up all the extracurricular activities, if you will, and got back with my girlfriend. We've been married. We have 3 kids and a grandchild who's 6.
You know, Miles, before we get into deeper conversation, I know that J-Dub asked you to give your bio because he's keeping me from exaggerating about your career. You know, I know you've accused me of that too. I usually end up, you know, exaggerating all your stats and the numbers in your church. And so thank you for keeping me from doing my typical exaggeration of the Miles McPherson.
Well, I tell you, one of the records that I still hold, because I saw a few, I had 4 interceptions in one game. And so my dad actually had this premonition that day that I was going to have 5. And he's like, that's crazy. And then I had 1, 2, 3, 4. And he was like, I can't believe it's going to happen. I had 4 interceptions and then a punt return, 56 yards. And one of the reasons I remember that, because it was a big day, but it was the first date with my wife. And so we came back from the game and I called her up, got back to North Campus, called her up from the phone booth there in the lobby. And I said, hey, I'm still gonna come over, right? She says, yeah. She says, well, how'd the game go? And I said, well, I had 4 interceptions and a punt return for 56 yards. And she said, is that good? I said, oh, I got to work for this one.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I think now she kind of understands how good it is.
So as we get, it's been great to get to know you, and it's important, I think, for a lot of people who don't know you of a certain age, who don't know who you are. But these days, as you mentioned, the last 20 years, you've been the founder and lead pastor at the Rock Church in San Diego. Again, you've been, even prior to what's gone on recently in our country, you've been one of the leading voices in terms of racial equality here in America. Since the death of George Floyd 3 weeks ago, what has life been like for you?
Yeah, and you know, this is a book I wrote 2 years ago, which is so appropriate now that I'll get into, because I've been thinking about racism all my life. I grew up in New York in a black neighborhood, went to school in a white neighborhood, and I was born in 1960. So it was truly segregated, and I got harassed in a white neighborhood because I wasn't white. Got harassed in a black neighborhood because I wasn't black enough. I have a white grandmother, black grandfathers, black and Chinese grandmother. And when George Floyd was killed, something triggered in me that I didn't know I was harboring. And I've talked to several people, black people, that have said the same thing, young and old, that something triggered in them. And what triggered in me was that all my life I've had this feeling of powerlessness to white culture. And when I saw him killed, it was like this most blatant, demonic, "you are nothing" statement. You know, when the cop had his hand in his pocket and he was just murdered him. And that has been on the forefront of my heart for, you know, ever since it happened. And then I started thinking about the powerlessness of my parents and grandparents and all the people, especially people of color who are protesting, that have felt that for years and years. And that's what you're seeing, people saying enough is enough. It's just feeling of this just constant reminder that you are less than. And so that was triggered. And I've always felt, you know, the brunt of racism, which is why I wrote the book, because my brother went to Syracuse. He was a quarterback. He was a Heisman runner-up and the #1 rated passer in the nation. Literally, technically, they have a technical, you know, by the numbers. He was the #1 rated passer. He's an All-American, Johnny Unitas, all those awards you can imagine. And yet the NFL told me he couldn't pass and play quarterback. It was strictly racial. So our families and personally and family have dealt with this. All my friends have dealt with it all our life. And so it's always gnawed at me. So when I wrote the book, I was like, I want to write a book that has solutions to bring people together, because especially in football, you see people, football's family, you see people come together. And so my heart was to write a book that can empower people and give people tools to actually come together, because our culture is us versus them. And you see it, especially now, you're either for or against the police, you're for or against Black Lives Matter, you're either for or against, you know, immigrants or whatever it is, Republican, Democrat. And you feel like if you're not on one side, you're the enemy of the other side. And that's not going to work long term. We can't be divided. So the third option, which is what this means, is that we honor what we have in common. that we're all more similar than different. We all love our food. We all love Pepe's. We all love our sleep. We all love football. You should. We all love, we all bleed red. We all made in the image of God, and we're all on a journey. And if we focused on what we have in common and listened to each other and got to know each other and walk with each other, a lot of this would be solved. Right now, it's you better believe my way versus why don't we come together and meet in the middle and learn about the similarities we have and get past focusing on our differences.
Miles, that's a powerful message, and similar to one that my father-in-law shared with me when I was hinting that I might actually ask his specific question. So you're bringing back memories, but I would ask you. I know that you're on Anderson Cooper recently. Yep. That message is so powerful. Have you had just an incredible outreach from media and others wanting to hear that?
Yeah, I've been doing media literally every single day. Absolutely, because people, we see the problem. Some are learning the problem. For the most part, the white culture is learning the problem. The black culture has been living the problem. And so there's a lot of education going on. But we now got to talk about how do we fix it? What do we do? And how do you live out the third option? And one of them is to acknowledge that you have blind spots. Blind spot is the difference between your intent of what you do and say and the impact. And it's not knowing what you don't know. For example, when people say, I don't see color, the intent is to build a bridge. And it's like, hey, listen, I want to respect you and honor you like everybody else. But the impact is this I'm not acknowledging. And the burden that comes with this, and the pain that comes with this, and the experience that comes with this, I'm not going to acknowledge because I'm going to see you as I see me. So I remember the first time someone told me they didn't see my color, I thought that they had an eye stigmatism, that everything was gray. And they said, no, because I never heard that term. It was kind of like, what does that mean? I don't get that. And they said, no, I don't see your color. And I said, well, if you don't see color, how do you know I have a color not to see? And so it's really just, it can be taken as you don't want to deal with what this is and what this brings to the table. And therefore you can't love me because, there's a verse in the Bible that says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. If you bear someone's burdens, it's an expression of love. If you're going to ignore that I have a burden, you can't bear it. You can't help me carry it. And so we're just going to talk like this over here doesn't exist. And that's not a true relationship. So, but that's a blind spot. And I think a lot of people, well-meaning, are saying things that are offensive and not necessarily meaning it. You can be racially offensive and not be racist. And just because you consider yourself not racist doesn't mean you can't say something racially offensive. So we got to acknowledge blind spots. And one of the ways you can learn your blind spots is simply to ask, go to people that are different than you and say, is there anything I say that's racially offensive? I would encourage all the guys to go up to the women in their life and say, is there anything about me that's creepy? I guarantee you're going to get some, you really want to know the answer to that question? Because we're just creepy.
Yeah.
But we do it so often, we don't even know it, right? We don't even realize, is that creepy or is that just normal? So, but I think we need to realize that we have blind spots. We also need to rename those people. The greatest commandment is to love God with your heart, mind, and soul. That's the greatest commandment. And then the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if I give you a label less than neighbor and dehumanize you, call you a white this, a black this, a thug, or immigrant or whatever, I don't need to love you because you're not my neighbor, according to that verse. Now, that's not true. But it's a loophole we put in our head. And once we label someone a criminal or a bad person, then we permit ourselves to allow them to be mistreated. And that's wrong. And we need to put the term label, the image of God. Everybody's made in the image of God, no matter what they've done. They've made in the image of God, and they have opportunity and the right to be loved by God and be loved by us and to have justice. And so if you put the label neighbor on everybody and then treat them through that lens, that would also bring us to a point where we can have mutual respect for one another.
course, that hasn't been the issue, or that's been a big problem because, we're not treating each other as neighbors. And we've seen that with certain rogue police officers, obviously, not only recently, but going back years. You actually have a very unique perspective on this because your father was a police officer, your son is a police officer. What have you learned about the inner workings of police departments and how they treat people of color?
Police, that's a multi-level question. First, I don't know that I can really comment on the inner workings of a police department because my dad, I was a little kid. He went to work in New York City. I could say this though. My dad was a patrolman. He was then a detective. And when he was doing that, it was very segregated. There was a lot of racism. And then he became internal affairs. And so he was arresting cops. So his very existence of his job was evidence that they were bad cops, but it was also evidence that they were good cops because he was arresting them. My dad and I were driving down the street in Manhattan, and all of a sudden he jerks the car and pulls over. He doesn't even park parallel. He just parks like this against the curb and jumps out the car. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? We were being followed by three cops in a car, in an unmarked car. They profiled us to have done something, but we didn't. And he was so mad because he knew of what was going on because he saw them pull out, because that's what he did. He jumped out the car and went back there, said something that I don't know what he said because I was still in the car. And he came back and he was fuming because he got profiled and he was a cop. Cops are people. I mean, you just have to understand cops are people and they're flawed just like everybody else. They have power, which makes it even worse. But to label all cops or anything other than human and is a little dangerous. So they have a very difficult job. My son's a cop here in San Diego. I go on ride-alongs with him. And they just see bad all day. I'm not excusing them at all because what cops do to people that we see on TV is 100% wrong. And cops will tell you that, but that doesn't represent all cops. So I think we need to pray for the police department and the relationship between the community and the police department, because we need people doing a good job at police. When you call 911, you want a good cop to come to your house. And you don't want to call 911, someone's breaking in and then get, hey, our thoughts and prayers are with you, good luck. We don't want that. But you do want a good cop. And so we want to pray that that all these things get worked out, which I'm confident they will, because we're a smart country, we'll figure it out.
Miles, you played in the NFL for 4 years, as you mentioned, with the then San Diego Chargers. You still keep an eye on what's going on with the NFL. The NFL's been in the news recently. How do you think the NFL has handled its racial inequalities?
Yeah, I think that I think everybody's on edge and everybody's saying the right thing and throwing money at the right thing and all that stuff. And if we try to fix this disparity through contracts, it's not going to work. And what I mean by that, there will be laws that will be and guidelines and all that is great and necessary. However, and I'll probably give a microcosm to an example, when they were going to give teams draft picks to hire Black coaches, that's a contract. And relationships are either contractual or they're covenant. And a contract is you do this, I do this. You do this, I do this. And if you play that game in a relationship, that's how marriages break up. I did this, you didn't do this. And if you try to keep track of who owes who what, you'll go crazy and you're always going to say, I did more than you, and then you're always going to be mad. There is need for different guidelines to be adjusted, but the foundation of the NFL with its players has to be relational. And so when I heard that about the coaches, I said, look, what would be better if the owners, and I don't know what they do now, so maybe they do this, but they need to get to know the Black players and get to know the Black coaches. So it's not like, okay, I'm just going to pick one so I can get a draft pick. No, I value these people as people and their relationships and their potential. I know them. But when you do it contractually, it's not true relationship. And I think so. To answer your question, the NFL can throw money and do all this stuff, but really, listen, what's different from today than 60 days ago? George Floyd was killed. All of a sudden, everyone's beliefs changed. No, it's like we got pressure now. And so do you really believe these things? And do you really believe that Colin Kaepernick had a point? Do you really believe that there's, police brutality? And what do you really know about how we can fix it? So I think if as long as they follow through and develop relationships and really understand and really believe that players are really just trying to get what we feel is right for society and for the community, and join us in on that. Just don't give us the, some token effort, even though it may be millions and millions of dollars, but really, is your heart going to be in it? And that's what's going to be key. So I'm glad they're doing what they're doing, but I'm just going to keep praying that the relationship goes forward, which is going to be more important than the contract.
Miles, I've heard the phrase throughout my life, reading or verbal, you were born for such a time as this. And as I'm listening to you and watching you, and you and I've had some of these conversations before now, but right now we're putting all this out in front of others. And the fact that you have a history as an athlete and a football player in the NFL, and are a minister, and have a dad that was a policeman and a son that's a policeman, you're positioned in a spot here that very few others are. And do you feel, how's that make you feel? Is that
yeah, well, I keep getting told that, so I better start believing it. I am now I received that, and I received that, and I'm excited. And when I was writing this book, and by the way, you can get it where books are sold, on miles.com. I'm sure you got to get, because this book is tools. And when I was writing this, to your point, I was thinking the same thing. I said, listen, I want to write something that's going to help people heal and develop relationships. And so that was a couple of years ago. And when I was writing it, I was scared to death because it's such a sensitive subject. And I wanted to write something. And my church has so many white people in it, and Black and Asian and everything, because our city is so diverse and our church is so diverse. And we're already united. I didn't want to destroy that. And so but I had to write about the issues. So anyway, I feel I have done that. So yes, that has been affirmed over and over again. So every day I just take one step further to say, okay, God, what else do you want me to say? Who do you want me to talk to? But I do receive that. I've checked a lot of those boxes. God has checked a lot of those boxes in my life to get this done. So I receive it.
It's interesting as I hear you say that, and you talked about your church, and as I said before, I exaggerate the size of your church all the time, but it's huge. Let's stay with that. And I know you have 9 campuses. One of them's even in a prison. I mean, you're ministering to a lot of different people. I know you in this one-on-one relationship, but I've also watched you online in your church service, and it's almost overwhelming to see the Miles I know up in front of those folks you're talking about, of all backgrounds, and the courage it took for you to overcome probably what were some fears of what others might think. To write that book a couple of years ago, I would even say that had to be just a premonition, is a voice telling you that there'd be a time when this was even more necessary than ever. And we're at that point. Yeah.
And even then things were bad. And I was like, I got to get it out. I wish it was out now. I would never thought it would be this bad. And so I'm glad I'm not trying to write it now, because I would be full of anxiety thinking, because it takes so long to write it and get it published and get it out. So I'm glad it's out now. And I just hope it can help people. And again, get it where books are sold: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, MilesMcPherson.com. And also, I'm always posting at Miles McPherson about the book and about these principles. So people just need to get educated, because there are solutions to the information to bring us together, and it can work. Listen, I see it every Sunday. I see thousands and tens of thousands of people every Sunday in our church get along, and it's United Nations. And so it's what we were meant to do. It's not even like, odd. It's what we were meant to do.
Speaking of the book, I don't want you to give away all the secrets in the book, because we want people to buy the book, and it's certainly going to be on my reading list if it's not already on Dr. Z's, I'm sure. But can you give us at least one actionable step from the book that we can all apply to our everyday lives to help bridge that racial divide in our country?
Yeah, I'll give you 3, and 2 of them I mentioned, but I'll highlight them. Just ask people in your life who are different than you, do you have a blind spot? Is there something you do that's offensive? Just ask that question. Number 2, rename everybody neighbor. Whenever you hear the media call somebody a thug or whatever, Republican, Democrat, all the names we hear, rename all those people your neighbor. And there are going to be some people you don't like that you're called to love, and you just got to do it, because God gave you his image for the purpose of loving people no matter what they believe. Okay. So rename everybody your neighbor. And 3, have a race consultation. Because we see color, we always know that we're talking to a white person, a black person. Even when you look in the mirror, you're talking to whatever you are, because you see it. That's not bad. What's bad is when you have an assumption about that person and you impose it on them as fact. So a race consultation is, I see a guy who I think is Chinese, but I may find out he's Filipino, and because I don't know the difference, because I'm just ignorant. But what I'm going to do is, instead of assuming that he's Chinese and this is all the things I think about Chinese people, I'm going to suspend that and let him self-disclose to me who he is. And so if you give people a chance to self-disclose to you who they are, the lady in New York City who had the dog off the leash, I don't know if you saw this, but it was, all over the news, and her dog wasn't on the leash, and an African-American man was saying, can you put your dog on a leash? And she calls the cops and says he's going to threaten her life. She saw a black man, and in her mind, black people kill white people and blah, 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 blah. She made an assumption. Little did she know he was a Harvard grad, very successful man, very articulate, and actually asked people not to bother her when she got death threats. So he was even humbled, right? But she didn't give him a chance. And so give people a chance to disclose to you who they are, what they know. I'm going to get emotional right now. People are amazing. I mean, Z, football, that's one thing about football. When I did a team meeting for the San Diego State football team, I don't know any of these guys. I know the coach. And as soon as they came on the screen, I said, hey, fellas, the first thing is football's family. It's family. And when you get in the locker room, that's why people are cheated out of life if you've never been in a football locker room. And I got chills right now. And people are amazing. And I think people who live in their own bubble, they're so isolated and they're so missing out. And if everybody around you is like you and thinks what you think, you are missing out on life. Get out of your bubble. Get out of the United States. Go someplace where you're a minority. I have a chapter in here, actually 2 or 3 incidences, but one chapter specifically, where I ask white people to go someplace where they're the only white person. Privilege is the freedom to ever not have to do that. That's a privilege. People of color have no choice. So I asked these white people and wrote about it in the book and wrote their experience. I actually have, here's a list of things. Answer these questions when you go. One lady went to a black church. She was nervous. Another guy went to a barbershop. Simple things. Think about if you had to live like that every day. And so if you really, really, really want to grow and be a better person, do those kinds of things and watch how your perspective changes. But if you're just sitting around with people who are like you, listening to people who are like you, that's like so ingrown, it's, so that's what I would say.
It's from the heart. Amazing message. I saw J Dub's look when he said, if you haven't been in a football locker room, you've been cheated. And I mean, it's to me, it's religion. It just is. It's been our lives. And I remember in graduate school, a young professor wanting to study diversity and all these ideas she and her counterpart had about what they were going to study. And I naively, this would have been 30 some years ago, said, why don't you just study our teams? Come study what you and I grew up with. And we don't have all the answers, but those teams, if studied, have a lot that folks could learn from.
And the biggest one is that when you're in the locker room, we're all on a journey. We're all learning together. We're learning football. We're learning every opponent. We're learning life. We're walking together. We're learning each other. It's an awesome experience. And then you come home and you get to tell your family and friends, the people who live on that side of town aren't what you think. The guys in the South or the guys in the North, or that, everybody has something to bring to the table.
Yeah. You're probably aware of Joel Ehrman, who's written some books about coaching in recent years and so on and so forth. And one of the things he puts forth is, a lot of different teams win in all sports, and I'm specifically now talking football, high school, college, pro. But what they've found is the teams that are the most united and actually talk about love and loving one another tend to win more games than those who don't. That's a real simple perspective, but it's true.
Yep.
Dr. Z, I'm all set. Before any other questions for Miles before we let him go? We want to end the show in a different way than normal, but anything else from you, Dr. Z?
I'm so thankful that you came on here, Miles. I feel like I got to share you with others. You've been sharing yourself with me for almost a year, and so this is a treat to let others see you and your heart and your message.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back there. I love being back there, seeing everybody. I love being on the Zoom with the team. They don't do that anymore, right? You guys are done for the year?
Yeah, no, we can still do some Zooms, and we're going to be
with all the athletes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, I want to do that again. I wrote notes from people's names. I want to start to know the players and all the sports. I really enjoyed that. My wife and I have fond memories of she grew up in New Haven. So
yeah.
Miles, we've not ended the show this way. I can't think of anybody better to end it this way because you're here. Again, you're a pastor and the founding member of the Rock Church in San Diego. Would you be so kind as to leave us with a prayer or a blessing today?
Most definitely. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for these men. Thank you for this program. Thank you for everybody that's listening. And we thank you, even amidst all the division in our country, that you are still God. You still offer us hope, the hope of unity and love. But we have to choose to take it. We have to choose to walk in it and receive it. So I pray that we would all humble our hearts before you and ask you to fill our hearts with your love and clarity about how we can love better, how we can serve each other better, how we can learn from each other better, how we can listen better. And may we lead the way, especially athletes, may we lead the way in unity, because we live it every day on the field. We live it every day on the court. We live it every day on the diamond. So I pray we can live it and model it in our communities. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
God bless y'all.
Thank you, Miles.
God bless you. Thanks for being here.
All right.
Yep. Miles McPherson joining us here on the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast. Dr. Z, a Hall of Famer at the University of New Haven, and certainly a Hall of Famer in life. Wouldn't you agree?
He's a special man. And you see why when I met him almost a year ago, 9 months, 10 months, he's someone you hang on to and you can go to for insight at any time. And I can't underscore enough the shared experiences of all athletes and student athletes. And I take it back there because that's how this podcast kind of originated. And Miles certainly did. There's a lot of beauty and love and wisdom in those experiences.
Absolutely. Before we have a chance to chat a little bit more, I wanted to let everyone know that the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast, of course, brought to you by our presenting sponsor, the Pink Clover Foundation. The Pink Clover Foundation, both a partner and a friend of the University of New Haven. The Pink Clover Foundation on Sorbello, who passed away in September of 2017 after a 4-year battle with breast cancer. Colleen's husband, much like Miles, played football at the University of New Haven and has been one of our university's biggest benefactors and friends over the years. In 2018, Sam and his family dedicated the Colleen Sorbello Research Laboratory over in Dodds Hall and established the Colleen Sorbello Memorial Breast Cancer Research Award, which supports a student pursuing breast cancer research. And coming up tomorrow, which is Saturday, June the 13th, the Pink Clover Foundation is holding a virtual 5K run/walk to raise money for the fight against breast cancer. To register, to find out how you can help, and to view upcoming events, go to pinkcloverfoundation.org. And we certainly thank Sam and his family and everyone with the Pink Clover Foundation for their support of not only our podcast, but the university in its entirety. Dr. Z, a couple of years ago, there was a commercial for a cell phone company, and it had the tagline of "What if athletes ran the world?" And it showed, athletes succeeding on the field or in the court or whatever it was, and then succeeding in life. I don't remember who the cell phone company was. Doesn't really make a difference, but I love the concept, and I brought it up with some of my sport management classes and communication classes, especially those that have student athletes in it. What would the world look like, do you think, Dr. Z, if athletes ran the world, and how much different would it be?
I'm incredibly biased when you ask that. And it's interesting because my mind's going to answer that in two ways. One, I think as people listen to Miles and other athletes that we've had on here the last few weeks and months, you get a glimpse of that as we talk to our former student athlete who played minor league baseball with Michael Jordan and so on and so forth. There's a family connection. There's I'm going to keep using this word. There's a love. There's a community. There's Miles talked about a sense of grace, and I would hope that the world would look different through that. Alongside that, something that I've in my coaching days and as administrator always talk about: competing on the field of play, in the classroom, in your personal life. And I've taken a long, hard look in the mirror this year as I talk about that. As we went into the pandemic, and have talked about being assignment correct and fundamentally sound and mentally tough. And I've shared with our student athletes several times. When I say mentally tough, of course I'm talking about that game point, that moment in the game when it's on the line and somebody's got to make a difference. But I asked them to start also thinking of it in terms of mental wellness and their own brain health and their heart health. And I mean that in terms of the soul and how you feel during these times right now. And where am I going with all that other than compete in ways that aren't divisive? I know that sounds strange, but I believe we can take that, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat and the competitive spirit within all of us. I mean, you can use that to unite just as well. And I know that's a lot of words all put in one place. I would also surround that with, when you say athlete, I'm reminded of when I finished playing, my college coach told my dad, it ends for all of them at some point. For some, sports end in grade school, some in junior high, some in high school, some in college, some in the pros. For those of us and anyone who's ever participated in sports, don't think you have to be a college athlete or a pro athlete to fit this paradigm I'm talking about. If you love the game, at whatever level you played it, whenever you played it, take those lessons you learned as an athlete and apply it to the world we live in today, which is a very different place today than it was just 4 or 5 short months ago.
Yeah. On a lot of levels, no question. And certainly sports, and anyone who's played sports, I think, as you mentioned, has a unique perspective on things. And we all want to be part of a winning team. And as you said, most of the time, it's been proven that men and women on teams who love one another oftentimes tend to do better. We often think it's because you win that everyone's happy, but it's actually the other way around, right?
Yes. Lorenzo Boyd was on here on our last podcast, and I was just on a meeting with him recently, this morning, as a matter of fact. And he was sharing research examples of groups that, when they have diversity within them, have greater success. And because you bring more perspectives, you have more creativity from individuals from all these different walks of life. And when you come together united, it can be a really special thing.
You mentioned Lorenzo. Of course, he was on last week. Now, he had mentioned at some point wanting to come back and do a mental health Monday. Did he do that this past Monday with you or not?
He did this past Monday with several other individuals, and just tremendous. You know, Lorenzo is such a people person. He attracts other people to him, and that you can see that happening on a Zoom call on Monday. Now, what we're hearing from our student athletes is mental health Mondays. Miles has been on, Lorenzo's been on. We've had a number of other individuals, former student athletes. Mike Ambrose from our track team, who's vice president of Sikorsky in this area. Our students are asking, they enjoy those. We have anywhere from 50 to 130 individuals on those calls. They'd like to break it down into smaller groups. That's where you can have more dialogue about these very issues of race relations that we're talking about with Miles and Lorenzo, or whether it be about mental health, or maybe it's just during this time of semi-quarantine, I'd call it, we're all still lonely. And I think we're learning people need people on so many different levels.
No question. You mentioned the student athletes and, what it is that they're looking for. And Lorenzo talked about it last week when I asked him, how is the diversity and inclusion at the University of New Haven? He says, it's good, better than it's been. Still need to do better. Obviously, every place wants to grow and get better. What's been the feedback that you've heard from our student athletes with regard to diversity and inclusion?
Again, I'm biased. I love our student athletes. I think we have just incredible young people, and they've reached out to us. We've reached out to them. Most days don't go by without me having the opportunity to be invited into a group, big or small, or individuals. Had a young woman off of our track team reach out to me and tell me that she had been selected as a diversity mentor on campus, and what could she do in our department. And quickly I grabbed John Mays, who we talked about, and Robin Salter. We got on a Zoom call with her. This was just, the days are flying by, I think yesterday. And, it's a good thing that Robin and John were on the call to ask her literal questions, because I was so impressed with her being that bold to come forward and say, what can I do to help? And then once you got her on the Zoom call, just a dynamic personality. And when she got done with her introduction of who she is and what she wants to do, I offered her a job. And,
did you really?
Essentially, I said, when you're done with, your degree, I'll find something for you to do, because we need young people like you to come forward. And she just, by doing that, nominated herself to be on every committee we're ever going to have for anything. Because she's just an example of so many young people we have in our department who are reaching out and want to help and want to have solutions and have dialogue and then find solutions.
We've seen that question on social media over the last month, maybe 2 months. Why UNH, right? Why the University of New Haven? Why should students and student athletes and their perspective, their parents, why should they send their young men and women to the University of New Haven? And I think the example you just gave there, and a lot of the stories we've told over the last couple months we've done this podcast, I think that illustrates why UNH, because they get these unique opportunities that they might not get anywhere else. And we're fortunate to have students like this who aren't scared to speak up, either on their behalf or, to use Miles' term, their neighbor's behalf.
Yes. I know there's a group of students that have become really incredible advisors for President Kaplan, who just like this young woman I'm referencing. And you have them in class. I have them here in the gym and out on the field and fields, the track. And it's young people that come to UNH come here. We're the school of second chances and first opportunities and school of overcomers. And I believe that. I believe all three of those things. I just believe that's who we are.
Before we wrap up, I want you to tell Charger Nation about the new turf for the football field.
We're fortunate that it was torn out last Monday, and they started to lay down the new turf this Monday. And to answer any questions you might have, yes, it's blue again. When I first got here, I had no idea it was blue until I walked out there and saw it, and I wondered when it was time to change it out if we should go back to green. And it didn't take asking many people what they thought about it. And what I found was there's a real sense of pride in the fact that we are unique and have blue turf. And there's obviously one other school, Boise State, that people are familiar with that has it. We have a contract with them that allows us to have it ourselves. Ours is officially known as blue and gold to separate us out a little bit. It's amazing to watch it go down. I forgot that when you're just replacing the turf, you're not doing the subsurface, so it's going very quickly. People may ask, why are you doing it now? Well, the day you put in turf, you start budgeting and preparing for the day that you need to replace it. That's what makes it cost effective. It's not something that requires a lot of maintenance, water, mowing, care. So you save money there, but you do have to pay the piper 10 years later. We actually lasted 12 years. We got more than our money's worth out of this, but it was at the end of its life, and it starts to become a health and safety issue if you don't replace it. It's not just for our football team. It's for our field hockey team. It's for our band with 300 members. It's for rec services. There's a lot of use. It'll sound crazy for me to say thousands of students use it, but over the life of 10 to 12 years, thousands of students will use that turf. And during this time of budget constraints, we're fortunate to have a donor that stepped up and helped offset some of those costs in some ways. So
can't wait to see it. I've seen the pictures online. Can't wait to see it in person when we all get back to campus. Yeah. Final thoughts, Dr. Z, before we wrap up for the week.
Man, you've covered. You got me talking about our student athletes and blue turf, and I don't have much left. It was an honor and pleasure to share Miles with the Charger family. So many know him already, and I'd like to think in the past year that more and more are getting to know him. And as we talked about on here, I think he's uniquely positioned for a time like this to be a voice out here for all of us.
Yep. We mentioned sports played an integral role in our society, and hopefully, building bridges, between communities, and certainly religion plays a huge role in that as well. And that's what Miles talked about today. It was great to meet him. I know you've had a chance to break bread with him over at Pepe's, and we look forward to seeing him. And it's cool that he wants to do more with the Zoom calls and talking to the student athletes, especially the football players, as he did at San Diego State. And as you mentioned, he's been all over the place. Anderson Cooper, right, at CNN last week.
Yeah.
He's done local TV in San Diego where he lives, in Los Angeles, the San Diego Union Tribune, the Christian Times. He's all over social media. If you check him out at Miles McPherson, which was his handle here today, you'll see the amazing advice he has for all of us. And again, I'm going to go get that book. I mean, that's on my to read list. Do you have it yet, Dr. Z?
No, and I will get it ASAP. But I kind of like an autographed one, so I'd rather I'd rather send him the money directly and get one. As we wrap up and you talk about for all of us to come together, it's especially in the university community, it's going to take people of all backgrounds, faiths, socioeconomic status, race, obviously is what we're focused on at the forefront. But bring together, and I think Miles would agree with that, all races, all levels of education, all backgrounds, and all religions.
Well said. Well said, Dr. Z. The third option is the book by Miles McPherson. If you're interested, it's for sale online and at milesmcpherson.com. It's been a great show again with you, Dr. Z. I appreciate it. These last two shows have been very important, very, very meaningful, and maybe the most meaningful that we'll ever do. But certainly we'll continue the conversation here on our podcast, just as we're continuing the conversation across all channels at the University of New Haven. So we're very fortunate in that regard as well. So for Dr. Z and for our executive producer, John Mays, and our producer, Broccoli Rob Thompson, we again thank Miles McPherson for joining us here on the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast. I'm J.W. Stewart. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time on the Dr. Z and J-Dub podcast.